there, sports fans, and welcome to the Heavy Hitters Podcast, the ultimate destination for your weekly dose of sports excitement with co-host Darnell Duff.
Now it's Sandvin, right point with it, left circle, Paul wants it, fires it, scores! Ashton Paul, welcome to Dauphin!
And co-host Jeff Henson.
Williams, blue line, shot, rebound! Oh, you hit! Score! Score! Morgan McLean! The Storm are AJHL champions!
Whether you're into goals, touchdowns, three-pointers, or home runs, we've got it all covered. We're here to bring you the latest updates, witty commentary, and a whole lot of sports love. So, whether you're tuning in from the sidelines or the comfort of your own couch, get ready for a fast-paced ride through the world of sports. Strap in, because it's game time on the Heavy Hitters Podcast.
Hello! Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back. This is a dozen. Yes, Jeff, this is episode 12 of the Heavy Hitter Podcast. My name is Duffy, Darnell Duff. Born and raised Winnipeg, now in the small town and loving life in Dauphin, Manitoba. Pleased to be joined by Henny, Jeff Henson. And Jeff, you grew up just down the road from Dauphin, but now you're here full time.
Yeah, exactly. Born and raised in St. Rose, which is about a half hour outside of Dauphin, and called Dauphin home for a little bit in the 90s before moving out to Alberta for a couple of decades and then coming back here. Great to be back in this region, back close to home, and just great people here in the Parkland region that you get to know. And, the longer I've been back here now, you get to see a lot of those familiar faces once again. Even though it's been 20 some odd years since I last saw some of them, you still recognize them, and it's always good to see familiar faces.
You know what, Jeff? I remember moving to Dauphin in that range. I think it was like 7 years ago. Brody and I moved up here. We had Brody's sister, Sage, the parents out as well to help us, acclimatize and help us move some things into our apartment at the time. And I remember getting to St. Rose, and I asked Brody's sister, Sage, so how far are we outside of Dauphin? She was like, oh, we're right there. It's like 10 more minutes. I was like, awesome. Our travel is almost done. I'm tired. I just want to unpack and maybe go have a nap. 30 minutes later, I'm still in the car because Dauphin to St. Rose takes that long. And I'm thinking, Sage, why did you lie to me? I was so happy. But it just seems that journey from St. Rose to Dauphin is a little longer than maybe some think.
No, maybe for folks that aren't from the area. For me, it always seemed to go really fast whenever we would come into Dauphin for some type of shopping or some type of an event. I don't know if it was just the anticipation. You grow up in a town that's about 1,000 some odd people, and Dauphin's the big city. Come into a city of 7,000-8,000 people, and then you're so excited for that. And I had grandparents grow up in Brandon, so anytime we'd get to go into Brandon, that's a city of 40,000, and you're even more excited about that. And then go to see cousins in Winnipeg, and I tell you, that was like Christmas. That was like Christmas whenever we would get to go into Winnipeg to visit folks like that. And it's just the anticipation was something that always seemed to excite. It didn't seem to be as long as a lot of people seem to make it out to be. And now, out of all of this, we're trying to make you a celebrity in places further beyond Dauphin and such. Of course, our continued campaign here, trying to get you to become the honorary mayor of Duff, Saskatchewan. You see, right now, Darnell, I think you're like the third most famous Duff in the world.
Third.
You got Duff, Saskatchewan, which would be number 2.
Okay.
And then you've got Duff Beer from The Simpsons,
right,
as number 1. So see, my whole plan is we get you to take over Duff, and then we go and we take over The Simpsons. I've already got this in my mind.
I can tell you put some thought into this.
I've got this in my mind. We pitched this to the creators of The Simpsons, some type of episode where the Duff Brewing Company decides that, they've outgrown their plant in Springfield, and they decide they need to build a new plant, and they move it to Duff, Saskatchewan. Because, how cool would that be to have the Duff Brewery in Duff, Saskatchewan? So, of course, Homer, not a big fan of that. Tries everything in his power to stop Duff from moving to Duff, and then in the end, you got to have Homer having a beer with the honorary mayor of Duff, Saskatchewan. See, that's how we tie you in to become the most famous Duff in the world.
I'm all for it. If we can make this happen, I'm all for it. And that just makes me think, Jeff, we had a lot to chat about on the podcast, including a little bit of an early Christmas gift if you're a fan of the Winnipeg Jets as far as former broadcasters come. But when I go to my mom's house in Winnipeg, which I love, I miss my mom dearly all the time. But my brother back in the day got a Duff beer can. Now, it's just an energy drink, so it's not actual beer, but it's Duff beer, and it will never be opened. And I'd love to do something with that because I just think it's so cool. So when it comes to Duff, Saskatchewan, like there's something here.
There is.
We just need to make it happen.
We need listeners in Duff, Saskatchewan to get on board with us here and help us out with getting this whole plan in motion as far as getting you to become the honorary mayor of that town.
Dan, big shout out to you, as well as in Edmonton, Aaron Young out on the East Coast. I know Dan's going to Game 6 of the Edmonton Oilers series against the Vancouver Canucks. We'll be chatting about that coming up on the back end of the show. But this is all revolved around Duff and Hetty. Welcome back to episode number 12 of the Heavy Hitter podcast. And things come full circle, Jeff. It just appears that when Rory McIlroy starts to win tournaments, he wins everything he takes part in. He's won back-to-back tournaments, and now he's one of the favorites this week at Valhalla when the PGA Championship takes place. But Scottie Scheffler's in the field.
How do you not go against Scottie Scheffler, though? The way that his season's been, he's the Masters champ, so he's got that momentum going for him right now. Yes, Rory has won a PGA Championship in the past. He's
10 years ago at this same golf course.
Okay. So that makes it that much more interesting now with the role that he's on going into this. But I still would, if I had money to put down, remember we do work in radio here.
But if we owned Duff, Saskatchewan,
we might have money we could put down to bet on events like this. And for me, it would be still on Scottie Scheffler. I just think with the season he's on, especially when it comes to the way he plays now as of late in major tournaments like this, he is definitely, I think, the guy to beat going into the PGA Championship this weekend.
Now, Jeff, I want to pose a question for you because life for Scottie Scheffler is different than it ever has been. He has a newborn that is less than a month old. I mean, the big talk going back to the Masters, if Meredith, his wife, goes into labor, Scottie was going to leave. It didn't matter if he was in the 16th hole on a Sunday, which I was actually talking to Brody about. And if we were in this same scenario, I was the Scottie Scheffler, which I'm not because I can't even convert a 4-foot birdie putt. But if I was, and I was going down 18th hole at Augusta and Brody was in labor, she wouldn't even call me. Because
really?
She wouldn't even. And I had mixed feelings, to be honest. I'm like, it's the birth of a child. But she said she'd let me finish the tournament, and then once that tournament ends,
you better be on that first flight out.
Yeah, but Scottie Scheffler said he was going to leave. He did not. He won the Masters, and now he's trying to become only the 4th player in PGA Tour history, as well as Jack Nicklaus, Tiger Woods, and Jordan Spieth, to win the first 2 majors of the season. He won the Masters and, of course, now trying to win the PGA Championship. But another guy I key in on is Michael Block, who became a little bit of a superstar last year when he's just a PGA professional. He's not a touring pro, but he had that hole-in-one with a 7-iron in front of Rory McIlroy, one of the greatest golf shots you're ever going to see. And then people were trying to buy that club off him for $50,000. He said no because he was going to try to continue playing with it. And now he's changed irons. He's now playing with prototype irons heading into the PGA Championship this year. That's one of the feel-good stories. Do you think he's going to be able to make any noise, or was that a one-tournament wonder when it comes to the PGA?
I'm going to say maybe a one-time wonder, but these types of events always bring out somebody that you never expect will be there come Sunday to have a chance at the championship. And that's a great story from last year. And I'll be curious to see who this year's story is that will maybe come out of nowhere to challenge for or maybe even win the PGA Championship this year.
Jeff, who's your favorite this week? I think I already know who your favorite is, but who is maybe your underdog or someone who maybe isn't getting as much attention that you believe they should?
Well, again, the favorite, as I've said already, is Scottie Scheffler. As far as, I guess if you want to say a dark horse, let's go probably somebody from Live Golf that'll be competing at this event. Is Brooks Koepka taking part in the PGA Championship this weekend?
Sure is, and he's just a major winner. The guy, I know he did not play as he would have wanted to at the Masters, but he's also on Live Golf right now. He's on fire.
Yep.
And he knows how to win majors.
Exactly. I mean, he's had great success at the majors, and I don't think you can count a guy like Brooks Koepka out at any major tournament. And so I think, this is a prime weekend for Brooks to come forward and challenge once again for another major championship.
I'm a big Brooks guy. I think he's a real competitor. Another guy who I think this week is Ludvig Åberg of Sweden. He was a runner-up at the Masters. He's 10 for 10 in cuts this year. He's had 5 top 10s. He's had 8 top 25s. This guy has his pulse. He's a young guy, but he has everything you need to win a tournament. Hits the ball far. He's very, very good around the greens, and he can put the putt in the back of the hole when he needs. So I think Ludvig Åberg is going to be a favorite this week. But I also look at Rory McIlroy. He's getting a ton of attention. Every time he hits the course, he gets attention. But as mentioned, he's won his last 2 events he played, the first of which was with Shane Lowry a couple of weeks ago. That was really cool. And then he won the Wells Fargo Championship when he came from behind to beat Xander Schauffele. Schauffele had a tough weekend on the Saturday and the Sunday, but Rory is bombing it farther than ever. There are some pretty incredible storylines heading into the PGA Championship, Jeff, and I think we're setting up for one heck of a weekend.
Yeah, I think it's going to be. It seems like we've got more interesting stories going into the PGA Championship than we did going into the Masters. I think a lot of people figured Scottie Scheffler was going to be the guy to beat at the Masters. There was people that were curious as to how Tiger Woods was going to play.
How do you think he's going to play? I want him to make the cut.
I'd like to see him make the cut, but I think that's probably about as all that we'll see out of Tiger. I really am starting to think the days of him challenging for championships, especially some of these major championships, have passed. But it's always a great story, though, when Tiger is at least able to make the cut and play into the weekend.
Now, he has said he still believes he can win tournaments. And do you think the whole feud between Live Golf and the PGA Tour comes into factor at all this week? Live golfers are in this tournament. Of course, Brooks Koepka, Phil Mickelson. The top Live players are at the PGA Championship this week at Valhalla. How much does that take away from perhaps some of the glamour and the cheer of this tournament?
I think it takes away some of the glamour for the PGA if a Live golfer ends up winning it. Can you imagine what it would be like if the PGA's marquee event in the year, the PGA Championship, is won by somebody that is now playing on the Live Golf Tour?
That would just stir things up completely. I think Jay Monahan, who, in my opinion, hasn't done a fantastic job as a commissioner, but hey, PGA Championship this week at Valhalla. All the top golfers in the world battling, including the Live golfer. I got Ludvig Åberg as well as Rory McIlroy. Jeff has Scottie Scheffler, perhaps Brooks Koepka. Who knows what will happen? But I must say, Jeff, we're going to take a quick break, and I mean quick, because we're coming back with a pretty legendary voice in the broadcast booth.
Yes, indeed. Looking forward to this. A guy that I met for the first time and only time 20-some-odd years ago at the NHL draft in Toronto, and a guy that's right from our backyard here, not too far from Dauphin originally.
And I always thought I was a good caddy. Apparently I'm not. It's the Heavy Hitter Podcast rolling on in just a quick moment.
Duffy and Henning are coming back with a bang any moment now. Get ready for another round of intense action. Don't miss a beat. Head over to the Heavy Hitters Podcast on Facebook and hit that subscribe button to stay in the loop 24/7.
Welcome back to the Heavy Hitter Podcast. This is episode number 12, and pleased to be joined on the phone now by the former voice of the Winnipeg Jets 2.0, Dennis Beyak. Dennis, thank you so much for taking the time. I think it's been an incredible journey and quite a story for you over the years. You grew up in a very, very small area just outside of Dauphin, and to think you made your way all the way to the National Hockey League, the highest of the highest. But can you take our listeners back and perhaps share your story a little bit, Dennis, of growing up in a very small area? I understand when you were playing outside street hockey, not only were you playing, but also doing play-by-play?
Yeah, that's kind of where the whole thing got going, and I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what made me be the goaltender and the play-by-play guy, but that's kind of where it all got going. My brother and I would play ball hockey on the farm, and I knew all the line combinations of the 6 NHL teams, and we kind of went back and forth, and it's crazy to think that that's kind of where it all got started, and then it just kind of went from there. And you know what? When you go along on a short-term basis from year to year, you kind of look back at it and say, well, yeah, this happened, that happened, and the next thing you know, you're in the National Hockey League. But I think when you look back at it now, and I think we hear people talk about this in no matter what career you're in, when you look back at it when it is kind of winding down, it is kind of an interesting path that I took from starting there to where it ended up, especially ending up back in Manitoba as the broadcaster for the Winnipeg Jets. So I think that's what kind of makes it a little bit special. Lots of stops in between there, but when you think of it, for a farm kid from Rice Lake, Manitoba, it turned out pretty well for me. Lots of help along the way, lots of support along the way, and it was a great, great ride.
So, Dennis, I got to ask, how good of a hockey player were you? Because I know we one common theme, it seems like, that Darnell and I have gotten from other broadcasters that we've talked to is that they weren't the greatest of hockey players growing up, and that's why they kind of lean towards the play-by-play side. So just curious, how good of a hockey player were you growing up?
Well, I'll give you kind of two sides to that. I can give you the one that I kind of referred to from time to time, but there's also the one that, after being in the hockey business for a while, if you've got talent, you will be found. So keep that in mind when I get back to this first story. Things were different back then. The opportunity wasn't there as much. You didn't look big picture as much. You didn't realize that what was out there and what was available out there. I got invited to Dauphin Kings camp, and it was right during harvest. And there wasn't even given a second thought. You're not going anywhere because that's harvest. And that's just kind of the way it was. So whether anything would have materialized out of it, who knows? I spent some time playing goal in Winnipegoses, both for the juvenile team and for the senior team, and had some good games and had some bad games like everybody else. But I'll go back to where I said before, you know what, if you've got the skill to go on, people will find you. But I love playing the position, went on, and after a few years of not playing, got back into rec hockey, got into senior hockey eventually in Saskatoon, and, had some success at that level. Keep in mind that level being the key word. And but you know what was most important? I had a lot of fun. I met a lot of good people, and whether we lost or whether we won, it didn't matter. We had some laughs in the dressing room after, get together for a beer after, and played ball with the same bunch of guys that I played hockey with. And that's the best part of it all. And when all is said and done, did I make any money playing hockey? Nope, but I sure had a lot of fun doing it.
Dennis, when you're talking about harvest, you're talking to a big percentage of the population here in Dauphin and area, as you know. Do you ever think back to what could have been, though, if you had the chance to go to Dauphin Kings camp and maybe sparkle there and have a good showing? Do you ever think what could have been?
Nope. I have never been one to look back and say what could have been. I have just never been that kind of person, because you could second guess absolutely everything that you do. Was this the right move? Was that the right move? You do what you do at the time and live with it, accept it, and kind of move on, because you can't go back and say, what if I'd have done this? What if I hadn't gone to Flin Flon to start my career? What if I hadn't been willing to go to Victoria? What if I hadn't been willing to move to the United States? What if? You can just kind of keep going. But in my case, you know what? Maybe it's easier for me to do that because one of my goals as a kid was to become an NHL play-by-play announcer, and that materialized. So maybe it's easier for me, but I have never been one to look back.
Dennis, who were broadcasters that you looked up to and tried to pattern your play-by-play style as growing up?
Well, Lou Hill was the one in Dauphin. I mean, he was the voice of the Dauphin Kings, and listened to him a lot. You know, in the cold winter nights, you'd pick up a lot of radio stations. You know, you'd listen to Saskatchewan Junior League games. You'd listen to other games across Manitoba. You'd pick up games from the U.S. But certainly, you know, the era of me growing up was the Lou Hill era in Dauphin. So, you know, that's certainly a name that I will always remember. You know, and then from a national standpoint, the Sunday night CBC carried the Bob Cole games. As far as television was concerned, you had Foster Hewitt, who did the 72 series. You had the Hewitts that did Toronto games. You had Danny Gallivan, who did the Montreal games. All you had to do was turn on the TV on a Saturday night, and you knew where the game was from, because if it was the Hewitts, it was a Toronto game. If it was Danny Gallivan, it was a Montreal game. So those were the names back then. Then Dan Kelly came along. You know, we lost him here a few weeks ago, Bob Cole, but to me, in his heyday, there was nobody better than Bob Cole. Whether I tried to emulate certain styles, I don't know if I did. You know, I think back to playing ball hockey in the snow in front of the granary, I think I kind of developed my own style a little bit, you know, and then you kind of work with it. Darnell, you know this, you kind of listen to yourself and you kind of work with how you want to sound, how you think you want to sound, and you just kind of go from there. But the basic style, I think a lot of us in my era had, came from the days of Danny Gallivan and the Hewitts and Bob Cole, certainly.
Dennis, can you take us back to your time? I know the community of Flin Flon has been a big part of your life. That's where you got the start. Didn't really start as a hockey broadcaster there, but got the chance ultimately to call some Flin Flon Bombers games. Can you just take us back to your time in Flin Flon and how that paved the way to becoming the great broadcaster that you are?
Well, thank you. You know why it's special, guys? Is because that's where the first game happened. You always know, once you get into it, you know there's going to be a last game, and you hope that it's on your terms. But you know there's going to be a last game. But you never know until you get into it. You never know if there's going to be that first hockey broadcast, no matter what level it's at, whether it's the MJHL, whether it's the Western Hockey League, whatever level it's at, you never know if you're going to get that first opportunity. And I went to Flin Flon, and like small radio stations, you guys know this, you do everything. You're a DJ, you're doing news, you're doing sports, you're reading commercials, whatever it takes. And that's what I was doing in Flin Flon. Was the color guy and did stats on the home broadcast. Bruce Ketty was the newspaper reporter. Later on, went on to become mayor of Flin Flon, but he did the play-by-play because he traveled on the road, so it was just easier to do it that way. And there was a game that Bruce Ketty couldn't make. He was under the weather, and it was against the Brandon Wheat Kings in Flin Flon. And I think I got the call around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock saying, you're doing the play-by-play tonight. And I did that game, and I think as much as, you know, I think it went pretty well, I think the realization came that, you know what, we are a radio station. We should have our own people the game. And I was called in the next day and said, going forward here, we are going to make you our play-by-play guy for the Flin Flon Bombers, and that's kind of where it got going. So that will always be special. Anytime you start in radio, whatever the career might be, I do think where you start will always be a special place for you. It should be anyway.
Dennis, talk a bit about the Whitney Forum. I mean, we've had the current play-by-play guy for the Flin Flon Bombers, Rob Hart, on our show before, and other guys that have broadcasted out of that game. But for folks that have never been in that arena, just take us to the atmosphere in that building. It's something unique, isn't it?
I'm not sure, Jeff, how much it's changed over the years. But I mean, one of the things that building became famous for was fans stomping on top of the visitor dressing room, because you could stand on top of the visitor dressing room and they would jump up and down, and the noise was fairly deafening inside the visitors' room. So eventually I think security would come in and clean everybody out of there. Back in the day, there was no glass along the side. There was players who were getting grabbed by fans in the building. I think the odd player kind of got punched skating by. But the fans were right on top of you, and it wasn't a big building, but it was a loud building. And there was great fan support back in those days. Chuck Arneson was tearing it up. Blaine Stoughton was tearing it up. Gene Carr, and just the names go on and on. So it was an exciting team. It was a great team to cover. I mean, very exciting. There was never a dull moment when Patty Gunnell was behind the bench of any team, let alone the Flin Flon Bombers. So, and teams would come up for 2 games. They'd come up for whether it be Friday, Saturday, or Saturday, Sunday afternoon. That was kind of the way it always worked because of how long it took to get up there. So, there was the old, we laugh about it, but it was true. You run them in the first period of the first game to soften them up, score the goals in the second period, and then soften them up in the third period because to remind them that there's a game again tomorrow, and then soften them up the first period of the next game just to kind of remind them where they are, and then kind of go from there. So as much as we joked about it, it wasn't really that far from the truth sometimes, but the atmosphere in the building was terrific. The fan support was terrific. You were basically right in the stands, so there was never a dull moment in the games, and just a great place to do games.
Dennis, I always find it amazing how players feel that they can really, generate themselves and generate some momentum from the fans just being out there. What about yourself as a broadcaster? Can you use the fans when they're so passionate and screaming and, as you mentioned, maybe even punching guys, but can you use that as fuel for yourself in a broadcasting perspective?
Well, the number one thing that as a play-by-play guy you want is a good game. That's number one. And then you learn over the years that you can't rely on the fans. Does it help? Absolutely it does. There's no doubt. But when you go back to near the end of my career, don't forget we were doing games because of COVID. We were doing games in empty buildings. So you couldn't just tone it down and not be excited because of the fact there was nobody in the building. You still had a game to broadcast, and so again, number one is a good game. After that, there's lots of factors that play into it. Certainly, the crowd is right up there. The crowd would probably be number 2, and I'll go back to my last ever game at the World Championship about a year from now, or a year ago. And it was in Latvia, Riga, terrific hockey city, and Latvia was playing Sweden, and there was 15,000 people inside the building and about 20,000 people outside the building. So just the entire atmosphere in that city played a part. You were excited when you got to the rink. You were fired up just because everybody in that city was fired up, and it was just a great game. Latvia went on to win it, first time ever they competed for a medal. Ended up winning one, so definitely. And the buildings were, but there were other World Championship games where the NHL scouts used to get a chuckle because they were across the rink from where I was, but they could hear me doing play-by-play because there was nobody in the rink. You would get a game between whether it be Germany and Kazakhstan or whatever the case was, depending on the host city. You did games literally where there would maybe be 100 or 200 people in the building. So you couldn't rely solely on the fans. So those are the two sides of it, but there's no doubt it makes for a much easier broadcast to get yourself fired up and get yourself into the game if you've got fans around you that are just making all the noise they possibly can and oohing and awing with every play.
You bring up the Latvia-Sweden game there and just the atmosphere at that World Championship game, the final game that you called on TSN. And how similar was it for you, Dennis, to maybe the situations you would have experienced in Winnipeg with the whiteout and the playoff atmosphere in Winnipeg with fans, so many fans inside and outside of the Jets arena for those playoff games?
Yeah, the last game came a few months later at the World Junior. That was my last broadcast. That was in Finland or at the last World Junior. And it was Latvia versus USA, and it was in Helsinki. So that was my last game. But you know what? All those things, when you go back, the closing of Maple Leaf Gardens, the last game at Maple Leaf Gardens before the Toronto Maple Leafs moved to the new building. Certainly the atmosphere in Winnipeg for the first game, it was beautiful. The weather in that October day when the Jets returned to Winnipeg, it was like 28, 29 degrees. People were coming to the games in shorts and T-shirts. You remember those days. The whiteout, no doubt, the excitement when the Jets made the playoffs for the first time when they came back to Winnipeg. So, and again, it's not just in the building. It's the excitement and the atmosphere outside the building that you remember. And, every once in a while, if you could, I know it happened in some rinks where you can poke your head outside the press box and get a real good idea of what's going on in the building. If you're fortunate enough to see what's going on outside the building as well. But there's no doubt the whiteout in Winnipeg, the last game at Maple Leaf Gardens, those are things that will stand out for sure as you look back at over the years what you've done.
So, Dennis, safe to say a pretty special journey, and certainly want to touch on your time in the National Hockey League, including you started in 95 with the Oilers, called Maple Leafs Marlies games, and then ultimately finished it off by doing a decade of Winnipeg Jets hockey on TSN 3 and TSN 1290. But let's go back to that last World Junior game. And last year, you mentioned January 2nd, that game between Latvia and USA. It was well in hand for USA. They were going to win that hockey game. They did. Live on the broadcast, you got a jersey from Craig Button. You mentioned how big Flin Flon was in your journey and what your time there meant to you. To get a Flin Flon Bombers jersey live on air in the broadcast, to wrap it all up, what did that mean to you?
Well, first off, thanks to Dwayne Bray for giving up that jersey. And then secondly, the efforts of Arden and Aislinn, a couple of sisters who work at TSN, terrific people, the effort that they put forth, the cooperation they got from the Flin Flon Bombers to get that jersey. It's special, always will be special, and very emotional to say the least. Later, I also received a Winnipeg Jets jersey, and on the back of it, all the logos of the teams that I was involved in. And it was Arden and Aislinn that put the effort into that. That is currently in the process of getting framed, and it has all the logos. It's got Flin Flon Bombers, it's got Victoria Cougars, Saskatoon Blades, Tri-City Americans, Seattle Thunderbirds, on and on and on. Every team that I was involved in, whether as a broadcaster or general manager in junior hockey, whatever the case is. And these aren't just paste on logos. These are legit logos. So between those two jerseys, you know what, you find yourself just looking at them and staring, and then you don't realize how quickly 4 or 5 minutes goes by because you start to remember. You remember the bus trips in Flin Flon. You remember the players that played there, the fans, the people you met. And you know what, guys, when all is said and done, I sit back now and just a quick story on the weekend, with all the games that are going on now, Brian Engblom was my first color person, first analyst in Winnipeg. He was doing World Championship games. Mike Johnson, I've worked with, was doing World Championship games. Dave Reed, I've worked with, was doing World Championship desk work for TSN. Kevin Sawyer was doing Western Hockey League between Moose Jaw and Portland. Shane Knighty, who I worked with in Winnipeg, was doing a TNT game between Dallas and Colorado. Ray Ferraro was doing a game, an NHL playoff game. I've worked with Ray. And Craig Button was involved in the both NHL work on TSN and also between periods on junior games. And I've worked many, many games with Craig Button. So when all is said and done, it's the people that you work with, the people that you're around, and the people you spend time with. That's the part that makes all of this special. The games will always be special. There's no doubt. You know what? From the time the puck dropped until the final buzzer went, for me, that was nirvana. I mean, there was nothing better. Good game between two good teams in a good broadcast location. You're prepared. Make sure you're prepared. There was nothing more satisfying, you know, and then all the other stuff through the years. I mean, chairing a couple of Memorial Cups, you know, Saskatoon, Seattle, and being involved in a couple of other ones in a smaller capacity, all that stuff. I mean, it's all there. We could go on and on and on and talk about it all, but it's all there. But when all is said and done, it's the people that you meet along the way.
You mentioned, Dennis, growing up and playing road hockey with your brother and calling play-by-play and how you knew the lines of all 6 original teams in the NHL at that time. When you called your first ever game for the Toronto Maple Leafs, did you ever reflect back to those days thinking, you know, I called this team for fun, playing road hockey with my brother, and now here I am getting to call them live an actual NHL game for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Not when I called the game, but when I met some of these people. You know, you met Dave Keon, you met George Armstrong, you met Alan Stanley, and you know when you went to Montreal, you met or were at least in a vicinity of Jean Beliveau and Henri Richard. You know, so that's what it was, and a lot of these players then eventually became NHL scouts. So you did cross paths with them. And so that's when you reflected to those days of when they played and calling their game, playing ball hockey, calling their name. So that's when you did it. It didn't happen as much during the play-by-play, but it did happen when you ran into them and after you finished a brief conversation with them, because you kind of got to know a lot of them because they were around a lot, and you kind of got to say hi. Some you got to know better than others. And so that's where it was special. But and again, this is cliche-ish, and you hear other people talk about it. You don't reflect a lot until the end, you know. And then the Flin Flon jersey presentation and some of the other logos that I look at. That's kind of when you reflect. Other than that, you're kind of wrapped up in what you're doing today. You know, making sure you're prepared for the next game and all the work that comes with it. And what lies ahead. You don't look back very much, or at least I didn't. But once it was all said and done, and I knew that it was coming to an end, and I had I guess the good fortune of doing it slowly. You know, I finished with the Winnipeg Jets in 2022. Still did a couple more World Juniors. Still did another World Championship. So I didn't just quit cold turkey. I just kind of took my time and still had some events to keep me busy and that was good until that last World Junior. And you know what? Totally at peace with the decision I made. It was a fun time at the World Junior in Gothenburg. I think I said Sweden before it was Finland before it was Gothenburg, Sweden, and everybody is there. We're all at the same hotel, and it was just a real fun time.
Dennis, I one of the first times I met you was back at the Pine Ridge Golf Club when I had the chance to be a caddy for you at the Pro-Am. I know you're a big golfer now, going to enjoy a lot of time, I imagine, with your wife and not have to travel as much for Jets games. But I know you said you are at peace with the decision. With that being said, Dennis, do you miss it at all?
Well, back to the you caddying there. That's when I said you were the worst caddy in the world, and you said no, that'd be too much of a coincidence. I shanked a few shots that day. You know what? I don't miss. I don't miss the work. I do miss the people. I don't miss the travel. You know, sometimes 4 games in 6 days on the road, you know, would get to be a bit of a challenge near the end. In the NHL, you leave after the game all the time, so you would leave 11:30, midnight, whatever, so you're getting into another hotel at 3 o'clock, and I think a lot of people can attest to this. As you get a little older, sleeping in the morning is not as easy as it was when you were younger, so I don't miss that. I miss the 3 hours a little bit from when the game starts to when it ends, but again, I don't miss the work, but it's the people that. And you know what? I'm lucky. I still, with the way it is today in the world, you can stay in contact with people quite easily, whether it's via text, whether it's via email. And as I mentioned, all the people that I sat on the weekend and just watched people, whether it was Laura Dykin who was on the desk, you know, all the other hosts that over the years, Cheryl Pounder that I've worked with. I mean, they're all doing things now, and so you kind of sometimes don't realize you're not part of it anymore. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay to sit back and watch these people do their thing. They're all very good at it. But that's the part you miss. You miss the people.
Well, Dennis, you mentioned the word lucky. We've been lucky to have you on the podcast. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your story. It's been fantastic covering you over the years. And again, thank you so much for joining the Heavy Hitter podcast. All the best. Get some birdies. And hopefully one day, maybe I'll get the chance to impress you on the golf course once again with my caddying skills.
Well, we'll try and make that. Well, your playing skills now. We'll try to get a game together somewhere along the line. Yeah, you know what? Anytime, you can never forget where you came from, and I'll certainly will never forget the Interlake region, you know, whether it is Rice Lake, Winnipegosis, where I went to high school, Dauphin, where I played some hockey, in that building, Gilbert Plains, Grandview, that whole juvenile league that, you know, that I played in back then. So that area, I don't get out there as much as I like to, but certainly still have friends and relatives and that back there, so do try to get out as often as I can. But anytime, thanks for the time, and you guys take care of yourselves.
Get ready, folks. The Heavy Hitters podcast is about to bring the heat as Duffy and Henny return in just a moment. But here's the kicker. You can be part of the action, too. Want your voice heard on the show? Shoot the boys a message on their Heavy Hitters Facebook page with your burning question, and they'll give you a big shout-out next week when they answer it. But for now, buckle up for more heavy-hitting action with Duffy and Henny.
Welcome back. This is the Heavy Hitter Podcast, episode number 12, part 3. Jeff, we've had some cool guests, and we're just continuing to have cool guests with great stories, and none other than a man who grew up just outside of where we're living right now in Dauphin, in Dennis Beyak.
Yeah, what a great story he was for us there, talking about basically living the dream, you know, playing ball hockey as a kid with his brother, calling play-by-play as he was playing ball hockey, and then, of course, one day getting to do it for a living, making his way up through the ranks from junior hockey all the way to the NHL.
Now, he called me not a very good caddy, which I had trouble sleeping, understandably so, but I actually played around a golf on Monday or Tuesday, and I shot a 91, which I was pretty happy with. So I was living the dream after that. Then I went to the Oilers, or I didn't go to the Oilers game. I watched the Oilers game, and I was living the dream too there because it was 2-1 late, and I was thinking, all right, we're all tied up at 2. Oilers are going to win this game. And then Vancouver ties it, and my heart sinks. But Mr. Bouchard, late in the game, finishes that one, and all I was thinking to myself, Jeff, was, yes, I can go to work tomorrow, and the first thing that you can say to me is, it's not that the Oilers lost.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, hey, it's a big win for the Oilers. They needed that win to tie the series up. And what about the decision to go with Calvin Pickard in goal for the Oilers in that Game 4? No, you and I have talked several times, and you didn't think the Oilers would go anywhere if they had to go to Calvin Pickard in these playoffs, but Pickard proved pretty solid last night to even up that series for the Oilers.
You know what? It amazes me how bad Stuart Skinner was, and Stuart Skinner may have played his final game in an Oilers jersey in Game 3. I mean, Game 1, he was 19 for 24. Game 2, 16 for 19. Game 3, he was 11 for 15. Like, he was not even close. Edmonton very well could have been up 3-0 in the series if they even had decent goaltending. I feel bad for the guy Skinner because he seems like an absolutely tremendous guy. He's always open to media interviews, even after he has a tough performance. But boy, he laid an egg 3 times, and that was bad.
So if you're thinking that already, what's the plan going into the summer? Is Calvin Pickard now the new number 1? Do they go back to Jack Campbell? Or are the Oilers going to be shopping for a goaltender again come this summer?
I think when the Oilers made the move to call up Campbell here, I think you got to go back to Jack. I think you need to give him, I think he had a good year in the American Hockey League, had some ups and downs, but I think he was able to go back from all the pressures of being in the National Hockey League and all the great pressure that he felt to just relax a little bit and work on his game a little bit. So I think, although maybe he won't get into the Stanley Cup playoffs this year, I think it's unlikely. I think moving forward into next year, you got to go back to Campbell and give him an opportunity. With that being said, if Pickard goes on to help, he was pretty good in Game 4, especially early in that game. If he goes on to help this team maybe even win a Stanley Cup, then maybe you're thinking, well, maybe he's the guy next year.
And what about Stuart Skinner? This is a guy that not that long ago people were saying was going to be in net for Canada, not only for the World Cup, but potentially the 2026 Olympics.
I don't know if Stuart Skinner is a National Hockey League goaltender. I think the game is too fast for him. I hate to say that because, like I said, I think he's a great guy. But I think the game is a little bit too fast for him. And I just don't know if he's a goalie in this league. And I'm being completely honest, especially not among the top 15 or so.
Whew.
I know.
Parent eating their young here, I tell you. Wow.
I said since day one they weren't going to go anywhere with him. And I don't know what his future looks like. I feel bad for him, but I mean, it's 2-2 now, and that series is going back. This is a back and forth series so far. Game 5 now played in Vancouver. I think it's going to be going 7 games. You look at how Vancouver has been able to stay in this series. It's been, of course, led by Besser, and then you have JT Miller with 11 points. You have 4 players with at least 8 points, 3 with 8, 1 with 9. It's a pretty balanced roster over there. Vancouver is trying to run Edmonton out of the building as far as physicality-wise. I mean, you saw what Susie did to McDavid in the latter stages of Game 3. They're trying to play them tough. This is a good series, and I didn't know if it was going to be as interesting as it is, but I believe now that it's going down to the wire.
I think this is going to go 7. I think this is going to go a 7-game series. I'm still amazed. You want to just turf Skinner altogether here. I mean, I've still got that carrot dangling back over here, I mean, I'm sure the Jets would gladly take Stuart Skinner along with a Leon Draisaitl in exchange for Connor Hellebuck and a few other pieces if the Oilers were more than willing to do a trade like that.
This isn't the first time I've been disappointed in Skinner. I've said, in times in the past, I don't think he's the guy. I really don't. He doesn't keep Edmonton. He keeps them in games, but only because of the fact that they have Connor McDavid. They have Leon Draisaitl. They could score 4 or 5 goals in a game. They showed in game number 4 that they can win a close game. Stuart Skinner, I'm sorry if you're listening to this. You're not the guy. It's just as simple as that. I want Calvin Pickard. I want to see what this guy can do because I thought he was really good in Game 4. Vancouver in early power play. Pickard showed that he could play up to that challenge, and it's not easy coming into the Stanley Cup playoffs under great pressure. Game 4 of the conference semifinal. That is not easy. If Pickard could stand tall, which he did in Game 4, I don't know why. I don't know why he can't continue to do that.
Meanwhile, I got to feel bad for the Colorado Avalanche.
Oh, man.
And fans of the Avalanche. Good friend of mine back in Alberta, Andy McDade, a huge Colorado Avalanche fan. What has happened to that team? They were on such a high coming off that series against the Jets, had the big comebacks in Game 1, almost came back in Game 2, and now they've just literally have come crashing down after the news of Valerie Nikushkin being put into stage 3 of
9
the
goals.
NHL player system. So, 9 goals. That was the best of the playoffs. And it's not the same team now ever since he's been suspended.
I thought when Colorado came back to win game 1 after being down so much, I thought that series was over. I thought Colorado would win that series maybe in 5 games at the most 6. Now they're going to need 7 to win that series. But with all the bad mojo around this team right now, Nichushkin and losing 3 straight, I don't see how Colorado. I'm very, very impressed.
And Dallas is rolling now.
Man,
Dallas
are they
has
ever.
started to roll after, I think that game 1 loss, the comeback win for Colorado, was the wake-up call they needed because they have looked very good ever since that game.
You look at Ottinger, 923 save percentage and a 202 goals against average. Outstanding. And the caliber of saves he is making is just, I don't know if I fully believed in him for some reason because he showed what he can do in the past, but man, this guy is good. Perhaps the only better goalie in the playoffs, would it be Jeremy Swayman of Boston? 933 save percentage.
You're forgetting Igor.
I know, 924 save percentage and a 233 goals against average. That's so good too, but Swayman is the only reason Boston probably even got out of the first round, and now they've pushed it to 6 with Florida.
Bob's been pretty good for Florida.
Bobrovsky's been. This is.
That series could have ended last night if Florida scored a couple goals on Swayman. Bobrovsky did everything he could to put the Panthers in a position to try to win that game.
Does Boston? The impressive thing about Boston, they did without Marchand.
Yeah.
Do they come back to win that series in 7? Because you're going back to Boston for game 6.
I don't know if they win it in 7, but I certainly see a case where they can push it to a game 7 back in Florida.
I never even thought that would even be possible. I thought at the start of the year and as the season went on, I was thinking to myself, how is Boston doing what Boston is doing? And especially when you lose Marchand, such a critical piece of your team, but you force game 6, really impressive. But I think one of the most impressive players in the playoffs so far has been Alexis Lafreniere. A slow start to his career, but boy, did he have a good year.
This is his coming out party this year. This is the Alexis Lafreniere. We're starting to see now why he was the first overall pick of the Rangers a couple of years ago. He's finally starting to come into his own here, and I think sky's the limit for him. Rangers, if they can find a way to now all of a sudden cut this Carolina momentum, because the Hurricanes are now starting to roll with back-to-back wins in that playoff series, and they are going back home for a Game 6. So that one, too, could very easily go to a Game 7 this weekend back at MSG.
And, you look at how that series went early. Carolina off to obviously a good start, but you had an overtime game in there. That's been a very tight series as well. I still do think the Rangers win that series, and I love the story of Lafreniere, who had 39 points last year, 57 this year, and now he has 10 points in the playoffs. Who do you think, Jeff, out of any team, what players had the biggest impact on their team? Does Lafreniere have to be right up there?
I think he has to be up there. Another guy I think is Wyatt Johnston, one of the youngest guys in the playoffs.
Oh,
just
he's good.
20 years old, and look at what he's doing for the Dallas Stars so far in these playoffs. And another guy now, last night was, he looked good in the opening round playoff series against Los Angeles. But last night was the best I've seen out of Leon Draisaitl in this series against the Vancouver Canucks. And if they can get him rolling, and if they can find a way for Connor McDavid to score a goal, I can't believe I don't think he's scored a goal yet in this series, has he?
He's getting opportunities.
He's getting opportunities, but he's not scoring.
He's not.
What happens when he starts lighting the lamp?
Edmonton wins.
I would say so.
But also have to give credit to Shelovs. I think he's been really good between the pipes for Vancouver. And another cool story. Comes out of really nowhere. Nobody knew him. You had Demko out to Smith, and now the third stringer. That's the cool thing about the Stanley Cup playoffs. But, Jeff, I mentioned I was playing golf yesterday. No birdies. Of course, that never happens. But I was sitting around with the guys after the round, and we were talking about top players in the National Hockey League. We all agreed that Connor McDavid is number 1. Then we wanted to talk about where Leon Draisaitl was, and one of my buddies, who's an Oilers fan, as I am, said he's the second best player in the game. I said no. I said he is a top 5 player because I want Makar first, and I want McKinnon. I'd prefer McKinnon and Makar over Draisaitl.
Yep.
I think you're stretching it to say Draisaitl's number 2.
And I think you've got to put Kucherov up there in the top 5 as well, too.
So is Draisaitl 5, or does he get the edge over Kuch? Pretty cool what Kuch is doing at this stage of his career.
Draisaitl might even be 6.
Yeah, maybe outside the top 5.
I think you got to also consider Austin Matthews. As hard as it for me to say that about a Leafs player, I think you've got to consider Austin Matthews somewhere in that top 5 as well, too. So I think Draisaitl right now is 6, just outside of that top 5.
How far is McDavid ahead of McKinnon, though, as the top player in the NHL?
Minimally. Now, McDavid plays a good, solid game, but McKinnon is so good 200 feet. I mean, McKinnon comes back and works so hard inside his own end, just as hard for offensive chances at the other end of the ice. He's right there, I'd say, with McDavid as far as among the top players in the league.
Now I know next week we're gonna be hitting heavy next week. We're already getting some preparation because next week we're talking goats. You have your opinion on goats. I have my opinion. Sneak preview, folks. They're not the same. This is going to be heated. I promise you that. But is Connor McDavid the GOAT
of hockey?
Of hockey. We'll talk more about this next week. But
okay, first, you know what? I'm gonna put this comment out here first because I was gonna save it for our discussion next week. I hate referring goats.
You don't like the goats
because there's so many different eras of sports. You know, how can you compare Connor McDavid to Wayne Gretzky when there was 2 different styles of play back then? The 80s was so run and gun, open ice. I'd love to see what Connor McDavid could have done in the 1980s. Maybe he puts up similar levels of points of what Wayne Gretzky does. What does Wayne Gretzky do now in 2022 when it's a little more tighter defensively? Does he put up those ungodly numbers? So it's so tough. And, we're not even talking Bobby Orr in this discussion. And there are people that think Bobby Orr is the greatest player of all time in NHL history because of the way that he transitioned the defensive position back in the 1970s. So it's so hard when it comes to that whole discussion of greatest of all time. It's not something I like, but again, McDavid greatest of all time. If I got to give an opinion, I say no. I think it's Gretzky is the greatest of all time. Just the way he transitioned offensively and does so many things offensively. I don't think Gretzky's the greatest goal scorer of all time, even though he has the most goals in NHL history. But Gretzky, I think, definitely just the way he sees the game and the way he transitioned that game in the 1980s, right now is my choice as the greatest of all time. Begrudgingly, because like I said, I don't like labeling guys GOATs because it's just there's so many different eras of sports and it's hard to really properly compare one guy to the next.
I cannot wait for next week. Now, I do. GOATs, Tom Brady is probably in that as football. But did you watch the roast?
I've watched bits and pieces of it, yes.
Oh, man. He was roasted real hard. And there was one when Jeff Ross came, he made a joke, and then Brady had to get up and say, "Don't say that again." It got a little bit heated. The roast was fun. It's on Netflix if you've never had a chance. We're going to be roasting each other next week, though, by the way.
Oh,
I promise you.
Even Rob Gronkowski took some shots at that.
Did he ever?
Roast. Nikki Glazer talking about, I guess, some of the money that Brady lost in, was it Bitcoin?
30 million?
Bitcoin or something
Crypto.
like that? Or crypto. And even she goes, even Gronkowski was like, "Me know that not real money."
Oh, the roast was good. Apparently, they're going to do another roast coming.
How about Belichick getting chirped?
I know. Robbie Kraft was in there, too. They paid him $25 million, I heard, Brady.
To do that roast?
Yeah. To get roasted.
Wow.
$25 million.
Jeez.
You could pay me $200 to roast me. I don't know,
I'll roast you for free here.
We're going to roast each other next week. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Heavy Hitter Podcast. We're on Spotify. We're on YouTube Music. We have our website. Make sure you like and share. We have some merch coming in, some giveaways to be had coming up in the near future as well. Jeff, it's been fun. It's been a slice. I cannot wait to roast you next week.
Get working on that golf game. Mr. Beyak might have a few more comments for you with regards to that, apparently. Speaking of roasting for free.
Wow. Have a good one.
Look at that. I just took that shot at you and you didn't even realize. See you in 7, folks.
We'll chat with you around the clock.
That's a wrap for this week on the Heavy Hitters Podcast. Don't forget to give the guys a follow on Twitter at It's the Duffy One and JHenson73. You can also keep up to date with the podcast by visiting the Heavy Hitter Podcast on Facebook. Duffy and Henny will return next week, but for now, keep it real and keep it heavy hitting.